Before entering the story, please subscribe to the channel, like and share to help me. Thank you. Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere soft, dimly lit, and oddly competitive. You're stepping into the hushed offices of 19th century bankers, where velvet curtains block out the city noise, gas lamps flicker in quiet corners. And if you're still awake enough to type, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where and when you're listening. And exhausted financiers engage in an unlikely battle not over money, but over the best place to nap. Outside, carriages rattle over cobblestones, but in here, it's velvet drapes and thick carpets designed to soak up sound. Banking is stressful in the best of times, but in the late 19th century, it's basically an endurance sport. If you're lucky enough to have one, you can close the velvet curtain around your desk, recline your chair. Some claim it started in the French banking houses of the 1830s, where lavish rest breaks were normal. Others insist it was a British invention, with the Bank of England reportedly commissioning special repose chairs by mid-century. Either way, by the 1870s, high-stakes finance is crawling with executives sneaking cat naps between client meetings. By 1881, he deinstalled what some newspapers called a slumber-thrown. Victorian moralists clutched their pearls at the idea of workplace napping. Newspapers printed editorials warning that nap desks would erode the Protestant work ethic. Some accused the banking class of laziness, even decadence, though most of the critics probably weren't pulling 14-hour shifts managing international gold shipments. There is a certain irony in calling someone lazy while they were trying not to die of exhaustion. The velvet curtain sways slightly in the draft from an open window. Outside, the financial world keeps spinning. Inside, for a few stolen minutes, you drift somewhere between waking and dreaming. An enormous leather chair with a lever that tilted the entire structure backwards into a horizontal bed. They symbolized a new kind of business culture, one that embraced strategic rest as part of high-level decision-making. You think about modern Silicon Valley, where tech founders meditate between meetings or curl up in nap pods with noise-canceling headphones. The 19th century version involved velvet curtains, oil lamps, and possibly a side of opium, but we'll get to that later. There's a footstool that extends automatically, like something from a steampunk Laws E-Boy catalog. They de-wake from short dozes, claiming they felt the market shift in their sleep, as if the Dow Jones whispered directly into their subconscious. Of course, the Dow wouldn't actually exist until 1896, but you get the idea. A small side table unfolds for tea or, depending on the hour, whiskey. Did napping bankers actually make better decisions? Or did they just invent the 19th century version of office flex culture, where rest became another status symbol? Worthington claimed it helped him avoid mistakes during long accounting sessions. Others whispered that he spent more time asleep than awake, and drift off for 20 or 30 minutes before the next big negotiation. It's not just about comfort, it's about survival. Slide it, and a hidden compartment pops open to reveal a silk eye mask and a tiny pillow, embroidered with the initials of the firm's founder. That's right, bespoke nap accessories. You wonder if this is the 19th century version of ergonomic office furniture, or just another way for rich people to one-up each other. Probably both. You can't make clear-headed financial decisions if you're hallucinating from exhaustion. They get the leftover benches in the records room, or if they're caught napping, strict warnings from supervisors. Nap desks are for the elite. You're reminded of modern CEOs with private meditation rooms, while interns slam cold brew just to stay upright. And given the sheer volume of paperwork, nobody's getting out of here early. You're working 12-hour shifts, sometimes more, tracking the flow of gold, silver, and paper money without Excel spreadsheets or automatic calculators. You squint at ledgers under gaslight until your eyes sting, which is probably why you keep fantasizing about our sleep. Yes, tonight's story is about the strange, sleepy arms race for nap desks, reclining chairs, and the ultimate midday snooze equipment. Reclining leather chairs with attachable footrests. Bankers' furniture starts to look suspiciously like bedroom furniture. Some call them productivity lounges, others call them financial fatigue management systems, most people just call them nap desks. You probably won't survive this if you're already halfway asleep, but honestly, that's kind of the point. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the marble floors of an 1870s banking hall, shoes tapping quietly. But sleep isn't just for nighttime anymore. Inside these private offices, you catch glimpses of something peculiar. Fold-out desks with silk-lined compartments. The rivalry starts small, with a few top-level directors installing discreet rest compartments in their offices. Historians still argue whether the first nap desk appeared in Paris, London, or New York. You run your hand over the polished mahogany of one of these desks, noticing a subtle catch in the woodwork. Meanwhile, the clerks and junior staff aren't so lucky. One banker, Charles Worthington of Philadelphia, reportedly took things too far. Not everyone approved. Still, these nap desks weren't just about sleep. A fringe but fascinating tidbit. Some bankers believed napping improved their financial intuition. Historians still debate whether this sleep craze had measurable effects on profits or just fueled an arms race in expensive furniture. Either way, you lean back in your imaginary chair, closing your eyes for just a second, the soft hiss of gaslights flickering in the background. You stir gently, still nestled in the imaginary folds of that velvet-curtained banker's office, but now your mind shifts to a larger picture: the sleep crisis brewing quietly behind 19th-century capitalism. At first, it was about ambition. You rise earlier, stay later, and congratulate yourself for doing what others won't. Work longer, earn more, that's the formula. But then you realize that when everyone else does the same thing, you're just stuck in a new normal of collective exhaustion. You probably didn't sign up for an industrial revolution when you were born into this era, but too bad that's exactly where you are. Some bankers in the 1870s reportedly paid messengers to wake them up in the middle of the night if market news arrived from overseas. One New York financier, George Ketchum, even installed a brass bell system in his home so telegraph boys could ring him awake at any hour. His wife was not thrilled, but that didn't stop entrepreneurs from trying to cash in on exhausted bankers. Ads in financial newspapers hawked all sorts of questionable remedies: electromagnetic sleep helmets, lavender snuff, even specially designed mattresses engineered for the financier's constitution. Translation: extra soft, extra expensive. Take the infamous wakefulness challenges at Barings Bank in London, where junior clerks competed to see who could stay at their desk the longest without nodding off. But 5 long ones meant falling asleep. Cover for me. Office camaraderie, Victorian style. Winner got an extra shilling. Loser. Well, hopefully you like filing paperwork at 3 o'clock 8 am. There's no coffee shop on the corner yet, so you drink strong black tea or, if you're really desperate, a teaspoon of cocaine-infused nerve tonic from the local apothecary. Fast forward to today, and you're still surrounded by people bragging about how little they sleep, as if exhaustion were a badge of honor. The gas lamps flicker low, shadows moving like soft waves on the office walls. Outside, the city hums along, carriages fading into the fog, but inside, it's just you, your nap desk, and the endless tick of the clock. Back then, though, the consequences were even weirder because, instead of burnout retreats or wellness apps, the solution was furniture. Others say it just led to chronic health problems, nervous breakdowns, and a generation of men pacing their offices in the small hours of the night. Some scholars argue that banking crises of the late 19th century were partly caused by decision fatigue, overworked men making increasingly bad calls because they had slept in days. Others say that's just romantic hindsight, like blaming a stock crash on someone forgetting their bedtime. Eyes rimmed with shadows convinced the economy would collapse if they so much as closed their eyes. It's legal, after all, and yes, you can buy it in decorative tins. It's part confessional, part nervous tick. Imagine the office gossip. Did you see Perkins' new reclining desk? It has mother-of-pearl inlays. You smirk, but inside, you're already planning an upgrade. You can almost hear the scratching of a fountain pen on paper, the slow creak of leather chairs as men shift restlessly at their desks. Steam engines roar, telegraphs click, and trains screech through new railways, all demanding speed and efficiency. Now bankers aren't just competing with each other, they're competing with time itself. You can't go home to rest because you're always on call. But maybe you can steal a few moments behind closed doors. Bankers start customizing their offices not just for work, but for controlled micro-hibernation. One desk from 1874 had a fold-out writing surface that transformed into a padded bench, complete with a headrest embroidered with tiny dollar signs. Subtle, not exactly. Sleep starts to feel optional, even dangerous, because what if you miss an urgent telegram while you're snoring? The financial world races to keep up, and naturally, sleep becomes collateral damage. In fact, you might say that 19th century bankers accidentally invented sleep deprivation culture before Silicon Valley ever thought of Red Bull. They didn't mean to. By the 1850s, bankers in London and New York are pulling grueling shifts, sometimes starting at 6 a.m. and ending well after midnight during crises. This is also when the first financial telegraph networks appear, linking stock markets between continents. One mainstream fact: the invention of the transatlantic cable in 1866 changed everything. Suddenly, financial data could travel between London and New York in minutes instead of weeks. That sounds great until you realize you're expected to be available constantly. Before, you had the luxury of delays. Now you have insomnia, a fringe detail. Historians still argue whether this sleep sacrifice was heroic or reckless. Some claim it built the modern global economy. You shuffle through an office diary from the period. Yes, people actually wrote these things down, and you find entries like 4 a.m., awake worrying about railway bonds, or slept on sofa, dreamed of silver market crash. Of course, sleep medicine wasn't really a field yet. Nobody had invented melatonin gummies or white noise machines. This is where the nap desk makes its quiet entrance. And here's where things get competitive. If you're a top banker, you can't let your rival have a better nap setup than you do. Meanwhile, some firms tried to spin this sleep problem into corporate virtue. A fringe but delightful tidbit: one banker's journal mentions a secret code, tapped out in Morse between adjacent offices. 3 short taps meant time for tea. Historians still debate whether this era genuinely needed 20-hour workdays, or whether it was just a cultural obsession with appearing industrious. Either way, you can't help noticing how familiar this feels. You stretch a little in your mind, imagining what it's like to balance on the edge of a silkline chaise, hoping your clerk doesn't burst in with an urgent telegram about failing sugar exports. You let the ticking fade into the background as you drift further into the plush world of banker nap culture, and now you find yourself peeking into the birth of a new office phenomenon: the private banker nap room. It's not just a chair by the desk anymore, it's an entire backroom oasis, tucked away behind heavy drapes or a cleverly disguised bookshelf door. Wealthy industrialists often had smoking rooms or lounges adjacent to their offices, but bankers took it further. They added daybeds, velvet slippers, and even customized sleepwear monogrammed robes stored discreetly in desk drawers. If you're one of the financial elite, you don't just take naps, you curate them. If his breathing got to shallow, meaning he'd fallen into a dangerously deep sleep, the bell would slide off and clang to the floor, jolting him awake. The term neurasthenia became popular, a kind of fashionable nervous exhaustion blamed on the stresses of modern life. Doctors prescribed rest cures, sometimes complete with isolation, bland diets, and strict schedules of napping. Of course, if you were a banker, you didn't have time to check into a sanatorium for 6 weeks. Some banks hired musicians to play soft violin music in adjacent rooms during rest breaks, believing that certain harmonies help promote lucid dreaming. Whether this worked or not is still debated by scholars. Some featured carved mahogany side panels, others boasted upholstery imported from Turkey. One particularly absurd model promised dream enhancement features, which turned out to be nothing more than lavender sachets tucked into hidden compartments. Some claim it was nothing more than rich people justifying their indulgences. Others point to diary entries where bankers woke from naps with what they described as clarified solutions to complex financial problems. There are letters from executives who considered it vital to mental sharpness, while others saw it as a slippery slope toward laziness. In the main halls, it's all about image-tall counters, serious faces, brisk professionalism, but back here, it's comfort first. Slippers under the desk, reclining chairs propped at the perfect angle, even padded walls in some cases to muffle the sounds of city life. It's like stepping into a velvet cocoon, and you're starting to see why this caught on. Even within the same firm, you'd find arguments. One partner might swear by his midday rest. Another might insist on pacing the floor with cold compresses to fight off sleep. So you brought the rest cure to the office instead. Outside, the world of finance churns along, but in here, time softens. You're nestled between ledgers and velvet, between exhaustion and clarity, between work and the quiet, fleeting refuge of rest. There's no fluorescent lighting yet, just low-burning oil lamps casting soft amber halos across the room. Junior clerks, tellers, and accountants had no nap rooms. Some added soft music, others installed rudimentary ventilation systems to keep the air cool during summer naps. A few even dabbled in aromatherapy, burning sandalwood or citrus oils, claiming it cleared the mind for better market speculation. They caught sleep where they could, sometimes under desks, sometimes perched on sacks of coins in the vault, hoping not to get caught. There's at least one recorded incident of a clerk in Boston falling asleep mid-ledger, his pen trailing off the page in a long ink line like a financial heartbeat flatlining. The springs creak softly beneath you, but no one seems to mind. In fact, it's expected. If you're a financial director in 1875, you probably take 2 or 3 short rest breaks a day. You close your eyes, breathing in the faint scent of beeswax polish on the furniture. Somewhere in the corner, a small table holds a silver carafe of water, a cloth napkin. Clerks scurry with ledgers, runners dash to telegraph stations, and partners mutter about currency devaluations. But in here, it's different. It's quiet. You imagine one of the directors finishing a tricky negotiation, then slipping behind the curtain to lie back for 15 minutes resetting his mind, maybe dreaming about stock prices or wheat futures. There's at least one recorded case of a banker writing to his wife about a dream in which he visualized the entire sequence of European bond markets like a giant, breathing organism. He woke up convinced he'd seen a pattern no one else had. Whether that's sleep inspiration or early burnout hallucination, well, that's up to you. And what might be laudanum drops if you're feeling particularly Victorian about it? He called it preventive oversleeping, though it mostly startled his clerks. Were they practical solutions to real exhaustion, or were they displays of wealth like the 19th century version of having a golf simulator in your office? Either way, if you didn't have one, you were falling behind. By the 1870s, the top financiers in London, New York, and Paris begin building what can only be described as sleep chambers inside their offices. Some are barely disguised, others are secret hideaways you miss unless someone points out the latch beneath the portrait of Queen Victoria or Andrew Jackson. You ease into one of these rooms now, the smell of cigar smoke faint but lingering, mixed with cedar and old paper. One mainstream historical fact is that private rest spaces weren't unheard of in the Victorian era. A fringe tidbit: there are records of at least one Manhattan banker, Josiah Remington, who kept a tiny brass bell on his chest while napping. You brush your hand along the back wall of one of these nap rooms, noticing the wallpaper flock damask, deep burgundy, designed to muffle sound. Historians still argue whether these private rest spaces were about genuine health needs or just status symbols. At the time, medical journals were starting to catch on to the dangers of overwork. You lower yourself onto a fainting couch upholstered in green velvet. Meanwhile, outside the nap rooms, the banking world continues at a relentless pace. One of the more curious office trends of the period is the introduction of sound buffers, a fringe but fascinating tidbit. Furniture makers caught onto the trend fast. By the late 1870s, catalogs advertised specialized bankers' lounge sets. Historians still puzzle over why some firms embraced nap culture while others resisted. You notice the difference between public banking areas and these private nap spaces. Of course, not everyone had access to these perks. And yet, the banking elite kept expanding their rest spaces. You breathe in, imagining the faint scent of lemon oil lingering in the shadows. Your breath slows a little as you settle deeper into the quiet corners of these 19th century banking chambers. But don't get too comfortable, because now you find yourself at the center of a strange and silent war, the battle over who can commission the most elaborate, most over-the-top nap furniture. Yes, welcome to the nap desk arms race. It starts innocently enough. One banker installs a reclining chair with silk headrests. Another adds a footstool carved from rosewood. A polished mahogany surface glides forward on brass runners, revealing a velvet-lined cavity just big enough for you to curl into a secret nest hidden inside the desk itself. Some models had mechanical cranks to adjust the incline, allowing you to fine-tune your posture for optimal drowsiness. Some scholars believe bankers convinced themselves that their productivity justified these luxuries, that a well-napped financier made sharper trades and fewer mistakes. The gears click softly as you rotate a hidden lever beneath your blotter. By the 1880s, some London suppliers produced entire pamphlets dedicated to nap-related office furniture. Pages showed diagrams of convertible chairs, fold-out settees, and even sound-dampening curtains embroidered with financial motifs, tiny golden pound signs, if you were feeling particularly cheeky. A portion of the desktop tilts, forming a headrest. Some argue it led to the birth of modern ergonomic design, forcing furniture makers to think about human comfort in new ways. Others say it was just Victorian one-upmanship, sleeping not because you needed to, but because you wanted to prove you could afford to do it in style. The lower drawers slide apart, creating a padded leg cradle. One financier, Emil von Rautenbach, commissioned a reclining chair, shaped like a Roman curule seat, a symbol of ancient magistrates. He called it his nap throne. He claimed it helped him channel classical wisdom during midday rest. Authors like George Beard published treatises on nervous exhaustion, while inventors promoted sleep-enhancing gadgets at industrial fairs. In 1887, the London Times printed a cheeky editorial titled "The Rested Banker is the Best Banker," poking fun at financiers for their elaborate nap setups. Some bankers wrote indignant letters to the editor. Others clipped the article and had it framed, hanging it above their nap desks like a badge of honor. The banker nap desk wasn't isolated, it was part of a cultural moment where sleep itself became something to engineer, optimize, and even compete over. Outside, the markets fluctuate. Inside, you drift between worlds, half awake, half dreaming, comfortably nested in a battle of velvet and brass. His competitors, of course, rolled their eyes, but secretly wondered if they should get one too. Junior partners and clerks watched their bosses disappear behind velvet curtains, left to manage the chaos while the senior staff recharged. Was it about health, or was it about creating a kind of private power ritual? Some scholars believe that controlled napping became a signal of dominance. The busier you were, the more valuable your time, the more justified you were in carving out moments of luxurious rest. There are stories of resentment brewing in office corridors, whispers about partners spending more time napping than negotiating. One clerk famously joked in a letter home that his boss's greatest financial innovation was earning compound interest while horizontal. Newspapers started writing playful articles about the banking siesta. Satirical cartoons showed fat cat financiers sprawled across velvet cushions, monocles askew, dreaming of gold coins. Public opinion was mixed. Some saw it as decadent, others as a harmless quirk of the trade. You slide into the space, adjusting your cravat so it doesn't get wrinkled. Outside, clerks are whispering about exchange rates. In here, you're sinking into embroidered silk. Others suggest it was just 19th century conspicuous consumption in disguise. After all, nothing says I am important like a walnut armoire that secretly unfolds into a goose-down sleeping pod. There's at least one recorded case of a banker in Boston, Augustus Winthrop, who requested a custom napping desk upholstered with alpaca wool because he claimed it minimized static electricity. Temperature control became part of the battle, too. Some nap desks included hidden compartments for warming pans, small metal trays filled with hot coals slipped under the footrest during winter. Others had built-in fans operated by foot pedal to generate a light breeze in summer months. Remember, there's no central air conditioning yet. If you want to nap at the office in July without sweating through your waistcoat, you need mechanical ingenuity. Whether that actually helped him sleep better is, let's be honest, extremely debatable. Others featured padded knee slots and discrete side panels that folded out into privacy screens. It's like a Swiss Army knife of sleep. But pretty soon, these modest upgrades spiral into full-blown luxury competitions, with rival financiers outdoing each other like sleepy peacocks. It is not just about getting rest, it's about proving your importance by napping better than everyone else. One mainstream historical fact: Victorian society was obsessed with status symbols, and the office was no exception. Wealthy professionals flaunted their success not just with carriages or cufflinks, but with their furniture. In New York and London, cabinet makers specializing in executive comforts began offering bespoke nap desks for the financial elite. One Parisian banker, Lucy N. Bourdain, reportedly commissioned a desk with a built-in music box that played soft nocturnes when he reclined. The Melody. A custom composition called Le Repos du Banquier, or the Banker's Rest. His rival, naturally, responded by hiring a watchmaker to install a tiny automaton in his own desk, a miniature figure of Mercury that would bow whenever the banker woke up. Subtlety was not their strong suit. These were not your basic roll-top desks. They were engineering marvels. You run your hand along the edge of one such creation in your mind's eye. A fringe detail? Historians still argue whether this arms race was driven more by actual fatigue or by the Victorian obsession with appearances. You shift your weight, imagining what it feels like to operate one of these contraptions. One of the more curious quirks of this period was the rise of banker upholstery catalogs, a fringe tidbit. It wasn't just about softness, though. Historians still debate the long-term impact of these nap desk competitions. Of course, not every banker could play this game. You brush your fingers along an ivory inlay on the side of one desk. Yes, they used real ivory back then, and wonder how much of this was actually about sleep. A particularly quirky example comes from Vienna's banking sector in the 1880s. You shift again, thinking about how these nap competitions seeped into office culture. One mainstream fact often overlooked. This period overlaps with the broader Victorian fascination with rest cures and sleep science, a fringe but revealing moment. You imagine the quiet pride of reclining into one of these masterpieces, knowing full well that your rival-less desk docenti have a built-in humidor or a spring-loaded privacy panel. Your eyes stay half-lidded as you lean further into this strange world where finance meets furniture, but now the story gets even softer literally. Because just as bankers competed for the finest nap desks, they also began obsessing over fabrics, cushions, and materials. Welcome to the age of banking upholstery wars, where napping became a textile arms race. By the 1880s, top-tier financiers weren't just satisfied with velvet fainting couches or leather club chairs. No, they wanted custom fabric sourced from the most exotic corners of the globe. Some scholars suggest that softer materials genuinely helped with relaxation, reducing joint pain and minimizing skin irritation during long naps. The cushions don't just support your body, they cradle it, like you're floating in some kind of cashmere cloud. There's even a rumor that certain bankers kept small heated pillows warmed over coals to rest on their stomachs during naps. Supposedly, it aided digestion. Whether that worked or just led to sweaty waistcoats is anyone's guess. Others point out that no one really needs imported Vicuna fleece for a 20-minute doze. It was about ego, plain and simple. There's evidence of monogrammed silk robes, soft woolen slippers lined with mink fur. In 1889, a New York banker named Silas Brewster commissioned a custom nap blanket woven with his own family crest. The blanket was produced by a Scottish mill, took 6 months to complete, and reportedly cost more than the average clerk's annual salary. A few of these consultants came from the world of opera houses and grand hotels, where plush seating was practically an art form. They brought their expertise into the banking world, recommending thread counts, color tones, and even nap length guidelines based on the fabric's tactile properties. Yes, in the 1880s, someone could make a living telling rich people which type of silk to nap on. His clerks had to tip the couch forward to help him roll onto the floor. He insisted afterward that it was the best sleep he'd ever had. Did he sleep better under it? Probably not, but he certainly talked about it enough. And the pursuit of the perfect nap became as much about texture as it was about time. And even embroidered sleeping caps, not because they were cold, but because they looked refined while dozing. Financial journals ran sarcastic editorials about bankers turning into napping dandies, more focused on their upholstery than on managing investments. Still, the trend didn't stop. In fact, it got even more elaborate. Or did it just create a class of financiers so pampered they lost touch with everyday reality? Some scholars suggest both are true. After all, if you're snoozing under a Vicuna blanket while the stock market wobbles, you might miss a few warning signs. Imagine nodding off while wearing a tiny hat with your initials stitched in gold thread. There's a small side table within arm's reach, perhaps with a carafe of water and a lavender sachet tucked discreetly underneath. Outside the nap room, clerks scribble in ledgers, the telegraph clicks away, and somewhere a bell signals the arrival of fresh market news. But inside, you're weightless, swaddled in fabrics so rare they might as well be whispers. It is not just about how it feels, it's about how it looks to any visitor lucky enough to glimpse behind the curtain. Even the stitching is a flex. You'd have to be pretty confident no one was judging you. British and American bankers had access to materials from colonies and trading partners around the world. Light sage green, soft periwinkle, and pale ivory were considered ideal. Dark burgundy or navy, while fashionable, were thought to agitate the nerves, according to one 1884 interior design manual. Of course, other bankers ignored this advice entirely, opting for midnight blue silk simply because it looked expensive. For reference, vicuna wool comes from a rare South American animal and remains the most expensive fabric in the world. Even today, there's no firm consensus. Some letters and diary entries suggest real concern about health and comfort. Others read like pure bragging long descriptions of new fabrics, imported curtains, or pillowcases hand-sewn by nuns in a French convent. Back then, it was nearly mythical. Percy complained in the letter that the standard cashmere fabric was too coarse for restorative rest. Imagine being that tired and that spoiled. Indian silks, Turkish mohair, and Egyptian cotton became status symbols not just for clothing or drawing rooms, but for personal nap spaces at work. You run your fingers over imagined silk brocades imported from India, cool to the touch, embroidered with gold thread in delicate, almost absurd detail. Some nap rooms resembled miniature Versailles parlors, complete with tasseled drapery and cushions stuffed not with common horsehair, but with eiderdown or imported Mongolian goat wool. One mainstream historical fact, the late Victorian era saw a surge in global textile trade, thanks to imperial expansion. A fringe tidbit: there's at least one surviving letter from a London banker named Percy Halcombe who requested that his nap couch be reupholstered in Presoff and vicuna wool. Historians still argue whether these fabric choices had practical benefits or were purely performative. You picture yourself settling into one of these ultra-luxurious couches. Of course, the battle for superior softness didn't stop at cushions. Some bankers insisted on customized sleep garments kept in their office wardrobes. One curious but real trend was the so-called soporific color palette. Some bankers consulted decorators about the most restful fabric colors for their nap rooms. Historians still debate the psychology of these choices. Were bankers genuinely pursuing restful spaces, or were they creating visual temples to their own wealth? You brush your palm along an imagined cushion now, noting how the fabric shimmers in low light. A fringe detail, of course. Not everyone approved of this soft revolution. Some contemporaries mocked these textile obsessions, calling them feminizing luxuries. Some banks began hosting comfort consultants as specialists who would advise on the most relaxing fabric blends. Historians still argue whether this trend contributed to better decision-making in banking. Did softer naps really lead to sharper minds? You shift again, imagining the cool slide of silk against your skin, the faint tickle of mohair near your neck. One quirky moment comes from Paris in 1890, when a banker's nap couch was so heavily padded that he reportedly sank several inches into it and couldn't get out without assistance. You let that image drift through your mind as you relax further into this strange chapter of history where finance met fabric. Your breathing slows as you sink even deeper into this soft and sleepy world, but now the story shifts towards something even stranger: the rise of the professional nap butler. Yes, in the golden age of banker naps, someone had to manage all those complicated chairs, curtains, and custom pillows. Enter the nap attendants, the behind-the-scenes specialists who made luxurious office sleep possible. You picture it now, a quietly dressed attendant, perhaps in a crisp waistcoat, moving silently through the banking corridors. His job isn't to manage ledgers or shuffle stocks. His sole duty is to prepare and maintain the nap environment for the firm's top partners. He adjusts the privacy curtains, sprinkles a few drops of lavender water onto the silk headrest, and ensures the room temperature is exactly right. Some butlers even maintained little sand hourglasses to time their employers' rest down to the minute. Some bankers trusted their nap butlers with private information, knowing the butler would overhear business deals discussed in whispers before sleep. In some cases, the butler was even tasked with reading calming literature aloud, softly reciting poetry, or the day's less stressful news items to help lull the banker into a gentle doze. Too short, and you stayed groggy. Too long, and you risked sleep drunkenness, a real concern in Victorian sleep science. Grunfeld claimed this practice sharpened his focus and improved his trading decisions. Nap butlers were expected to be discreet, invisible almost. They weren't part of the business meetings, and they certainly didn't weigh in on financial matters. But they became fixtures in the private office landscape, like silent custodians of sleep. Other bankers copied the trend, turning their nap butlers into part-time masseuses. In 1893, a banker in Philadelphia named Howard Filkins reportedly paid his nap butler a Christmas bonus equivalent to 3 months' salary because he demastered the art of undetectable blanket adjustment. But for a few decades, the nap butler was as essential to a banker's toolkit as a good fountain pen or a sturdy ledger. Filkins bragged that he could fall asleep, have his blanket straightened mid-nap, and never notice. That's not just service, that's sleep ninja territory. In New York, a few firms insisted on gray waistcoats with silver buttons, while Parisian banks preferred dark blue livery with minimal ornamentation. The goal was always the same: quiet professionalism, no distractions. You couldn't have your nap interrupted by the jangling keys of an overzealous porter. Or were they just another cog in the machine of Victorian elitism? Some bankers thought so. They believed a rested mind made fewer costly mistakes. The gentle clink of a porcelain teacup being set down quietly in case you wake thirsty. Outside, the city rumbles on, carriages clatter over cobblestones, stock tickers chatter, but inside this nap chamber, there's only stillness. Others just enjoyed the theater of it, the ritual, the performance of self-care as a power move. Some modern scholars lean toward the latter, but admit that the butler's presence did shape office culture in unexpected ways. In New York, London, and Paris, the wealthiest banks began hiring these specialists in the 1880s. He dims the gaslights in the office suite, draws heavy velvet curtains, and checks that the banker's feet are properly supported on a padded footrest. Maybe he fluffs a silk pillow with just enough force to redistribute the feathers, but not so much that it disturbs the afternoon hush. The butler steps back, blending into the wallpaper, waiting silently in case he's needed again. Penworth bragged that his butler had the finest wrist for nap termination in London, able to rouse him precisely at the optimal moment in his sleep cycle. It's basically Victorian sleep tracking, but with a human instead of an app. Some scholars claim these attendants genuinely improved office morale by ensuring rest periods went smoothly. Others suggest they were simply status symbols walking, breathing signs of a banker's personal importance. Their official titles varied: arrest steward, gentleman's repose valet, or the more casual butler, but their role was always the same: manage the nap. One mainstream historical fact: the Victorian period saw a rise in professional domestic service roles. Upper-class homes and offices alike were staffed with specialists for nearly every task. There were glove cleaners, mustache groomers, and yes, personal napping aides. Wealthy bankers simply brought this culture of service into their workplace, expecting the same level of comfort at the office as they had at home. A fringe detail: in 1891, the London banking firm Hutchinson and Blythe advertised for a nap facilitator in the Times Classifieds. The listing specified, must possess a gentle manner, silent tread, and knowledge of warming pans. That last part sounds funny now, but back then, keeping someone's feet warm during a nap was considered a serious skill. You didn't want to wake up with cold toes, especially if you were expected to close a £1,000,000 deal afterward. Historians still argue whether nap butlers were truly necessary or just another layer of Victorian excess. You imagine the daily routine of a nap butler. Each morning, he checks the linen on the nap couch, smoothing out any wrinkles with careful precision. One quirky tidbit comes from an 1885 diary entry by a banker named Harold Penworth, who wrote about his nap butler gently waking him with a soft chime bell, not a harsh alarm clock. These attendants weren't just about logistics, they became confidants, too. Historians still debate whether these roles blurred into psychological caregiving. Were nap butlers early forms of workplace wellness coordinators? You picture one of these attendants preparing for a nap session, a fringe but fascinating case. In Vienna, a banker named Leopold Grunfeld reportedly trained his nap butler to perform reflexology, yes, Victorian foot massages during post-nap recovery. Of course, there were boundaries to this role. Some banks even provided special uniforms for these attendants. Historians still argue about the economics of it all. Was paying a full-time nap butler actually a smart investment? You lean further into the story, imagining the soft rustle of the butler adjusting a blanket, the faint scent of beeswax from polished wood surfaces, a quirky but telling anecdote. By the turn of the century, some of these roles faded as office culture modernized and work habits shifted. You breathe out slowly, letting your mind linger on this nearly forgotten profession, a job that required patience, silence, and the precise folding of blankets in the service of elite slumber. Your body relaxes deeper into the mattress as the story glides onward, and now you drift into one of the most curious corners of this sleepy banking history: the secret competitions. Because it turns out, napping wasn't just a private indulgence in the 19th century finance world. Sometimes it became, well, a sport. An underground culture of rest contests had emerged among elite bankers in cities like London, New York, and Paris. These weren't officially sanctioned, of course. There were no public invitations or newspaper notices. But behind closed office doors, in plush nap rooms guarded by loyal clerks and butlers, bankers would challenge each other to see who could achieve the most perfect repose. By the 1890s, a group of suited men recline in padded chairs or stretch out on fainting couches, eyes closed, trying to achieve what they called the unflappable nap. The idea was that if you truly relaxed, you'd drop it. But if you were tense, you'd clutch it tighter without realizing. Contest monitors checked for dropped marbles as proof of authentic surrender to sleep. It was basically biofeedback, Victorian style. No tossing, no adjusting, just serene, uninterrupted stillness. Bananas were a popular pre-nap snack because they were believed to calm the stomach and contain nerve-soothing potassium salts, according to an 1894 health manual. Others swore by warm milk with nutmeg, though there is some debate about whether that actually helped or just gave them weird dreams about spice traders. There are surviving ledgers where clerks tracked rest quality, noting terms like excellent repose, partial fidget, or unseemly snoring. After all, the late 19th century was a time of rapid industrialization, telegraph communication, and financial volatility. Perhaps competitive napping was a banker's way of saying, "Look, I can stay calm while the world speeds up. I can be the eye of the storm." These records were mostly private jokes among colleagues, but a few firms took them so seriously that they factored rest performance into informal rankings of executive discipline. A silk handkerchief covers his eyes, blocking out the flickering gaslights. Or were they just another way to measure status, discipline, and control in a world that rarely allowed for real relaxation? His butler stands at a respectful distance, ready to intervene if the nap needs adjusting, but knowing that any unnecessary movement will lose points. Some participants became so skilled at suppressing movement that they accidentally trained themselves to fall asleep in public settings during opera performances, business meetings, or even carriage rides. This led to a few embarrassing incidents where a banker would nod off at an inopportune moment, prompting awkward whispers about overtraining. Some even trained for these contests, practicing specific breathing patterns: slow inhales through the nose, long sighing exhales through barely parted lips. Some participants described their experiences using language similar to what you'd hear from a Zen practitioner today: mind floating free, body weightless, breath as soft as silk thread, the weight of a silver pocket watch in one's vest, the faint, rhythmic tick of the clock on the mantle as everyone tries to become perfectly still, eyes flutter open. A yawn is stifled because yawning, in this setting, is considered undignified. The judges confer in hushed voices who maintained the steadiest breathing, who resisted the temptation to scratch an itch or adjust a cufflink. But were they really achieving inner peace? Or were they just showing off their ability to switch off on command? There were competitions for who could sit still the longest, who could walk the furthest without sleep, and who could balance objects on their head for hours. You'd lie there, heartbeat slowing, the distant sound of horse hooves on cobblestone muffled by heavy curtains. A clerk sits quietly nearby, stopwatch in hand, making sure no one sneaks a peek at the clock or cheats by slipping out for coffee. You focus on your breathing, letting the rhythm lull you into that perfect in-between state, not quite asleep, but far from awake. So it is not surprising that competitive napping became part of that cultural landscape, especially in elite financial circles where egos loomed large. In 1895, two bankers in New York's Wall Street district reportedly held a private nap duel to settle an argument about who was the most restful gentleman. The duel took place in a side room of the banking hall, overseen by neutral clerks. The winner, Charles Fenwick, managed to stay motionless for 42 minutes, while his opponent's nose twitched at the 20-minute mark. Fenwick celebrated by commissioning an oil painting of himself napping, a portrait that hung in his office for years. One mainstream historical fact: Victorian and Edwardian society loved quirky endurance contests. According to a letter from a participant, the goal wasn't just to sleep, but to fall into such a profound state of rest that one's pulse, breathing, and muscle tension approached monastic levels of calm. Monitors checked for involuntary twitches, fidgeting, or restless sighs. The prize: a silver pocket watch engraved with the words "Master of Repose." A fringe tidbit: there's at least one documented case of a gentleman's nap-off held in 1892 at a private London banking club. Some believe bankers used them to test new relaxation methods, experimenting with breath control and posture. Others think it was mostly about bragging rights, who could nap like an emperor while the stock market churned in the background. Historians still argue whether these contests were serious wellness practices or just ego-fueled sideshows. You imagine the scene: heavy velvet curtains drawn shut, oil lamps dimmed low, the faint smell of beeswax and leather in the air. A quirky but real technique involved clutching a small object like a marble or a coin loosely in one hand. Some competitors used food strategies, too. Historians still debate whether these nap contests were linked to early explorations of meditation. You sink into the thought of being part of one of these contests. There's even a recorded incident of competitive napping getting, well, a bit too competitive, a fringe tidbit. Some banks even started recording nap stats. Historians still argue whether this obsession with controlled rest was part of a broader anxiety about modern life. You picture one of these bankers reclining on a custom mahogany chaise with brass nailhead trim, his hands folded gently over his chest. And then there's the finish line moment, the soft chime of a bell, the slight clearing of a clerk's throat to signal the end of the contest. A quirky side effect of these competitions: you let your mind drift now, visualizing the soft creak of leather as someone shifts ever so slightly, hoping the clerk didn't notice. And underneath it all, the question lingers: were these contests truly about rest? You breathe out, shoulders loosening, imagining yourself winning the prize not for staying awake, but for letting go. Your eyelids feel heavier now, the kind of heaviness that comes when you've been wandering through strange and forgotten corners of history for just long enough. But there's still more to this curious world of banker naps, and tonight, you'll drift into the peculiar realm of napping technology. Naturally, this led to the rise of the nap gadget craze, a brief but enthusiastic period when inventors flooded the market with tools, devices, and contraptions, all promising to deliver the perfect workplace snooze. Because as soon as naps became competitive, 19th century bankers started looking for ways to hack the process. It looked like a normal banker's recliner, but it had hidden compartments for warming pans, discreet armrest bells to summon a nap butler, and most oddly a built-in metronome. The metronome ticked softly near the user's ear, supposedly guiding their breathing into a restful rhythm. Maybe he sets the warming pans to a mild heat, no one likes sweaty ankles, after all. He flips a small switch, and the metronome starts its gentle tick. Tick, tick. For a moment, it works. His shoulders drop, his breath slows. And then his secretary knocks on the door with urgent telegrams, ruining everything. The idea was that you'd unconsciously sync your own pulse with the gentle ticking. Did it work? Some people swore by it. Others said it made them paranoid about sudden cardiac arrest. Again, he claimed it reminded him of his childhood on a farm and helped him relax. Bankers reclining in mechanical chairs, strapped into velvet-lined helmets, breathing in lavender vapor from tiny steam diffusers. After all, these were men who believed every problem could be solved with the right lever or gear. Why not naps, too? It sounds ridiculous, but also kind of tempting, doesn't it? There were preferred suppliers, volume discounts, and product demonstrations at private clubs. But a few concepts survived: weighted blankets, guided breathing, and soundscapes for sleep. Maybe the perfect nap can't be engineered, no matter how many gadgets you buy. Or maybe, just maybe, part of the ritual is the attempt itself. Those ideas trace their roots back to these strange 19th century experiments. You can almost hear the sales pitch: why settle for an ordinary rest when you could have scientifically optimized slumber? His colleagues, however, referred to his office as the barn and occasionally left hay on his desk as a joke. You know, the same mindset that gave us mechanical corsets and steam-powered toothbrushes. But bankers quickly learned that if the tempo was set to fast, it just gave them anxiety. It had mercury-filled tubes that adjusted to body weight, anticipating pressure points. Unfortunately, mercury leaks became an issue, so the design didn't catch on. But the idea of personalized sleep furniture, that stuck around. There were respiration regulators, basically leather straps meant to encourage diaphragmatic breathing. There were weighted sleep cloaks, lined with lead shot for that cozy, pinned-down feeling we'd now call a gravity blanket. Of course, back then, no one worried about lead poisoning. Victorian science had a few gaps. In London, one company sold wax phonograph cylinders labeled restful tones for gentlemen of finance. The recordings featured soft rain sounds, distant church bells, and oddly a reading of commodity prices in a monotonous drone. Some bankers found this hypnotic, others just found it funny. One mainstream historical fact: the late 19th century was a golden age of mechanical innovation. It was made of velvet and padded brass, shaped like a knight's visor, but lined with soft wool. According to his journal, Carter believed the helmet blocked out both light and the invasive energies of financial stress. Historians still debate whether he meant that metaphorically or if he actually thought the helmet deflected negative stock market vibrations. Either way, he wore it religiously. Everything from sewing machines to cash registers to pocket watches was getting more advanced. Some were harmless little comforts, like ergonomic neck cushions or lavender-scented eye masks. Others, well, let's just say they were more ambitious. People trusted gadgets to solve problems, and the problem of tiredness was no exception. So, imagine the trade catalogs of the 1880s and 1890s, filled with glossy engravings of patented repose facilitators and scientific sleep aids. A fringe tidbit: one particularly strange device was the Somna chair, marketed in 1894 by a Parisian inventor named Jules Mercier. Historians still argue whether these gadgets actually worked or were just placebo devices wrapped in polished mahogany. Some experts believe the metronome method may have helped induce a trance-like state, similar to modern mindfulness techniques. Others dismiss it as pseudoscience, noting that most of these devices disappeared from the market within a decade. You picture a well-dressed banker in his office, carefully adjusting the levers of his Somna chair before leaning back. Some of these nap gadgets were so complicated that they required their own instruction manuals. One banker in Boston, Henry Lowell Carter, reportedly used a custom-built napping helmet in the 1890s. Another fringe device, the repose regulator, essentially a miniature wind-up clock placed near the user's chest to mimic the sound of a steady heartbeat. Historians still argue whether these devices represented early biofeedback experiments or just the Victorian tendency to overcomplicate everything. But the gadgets didn't stop at physical contraptions. There were also sound-based sleep aids. A quirky tidbit: a banker in Chicago named Reginald Smathers became notorious for his personal napping routine, which involved playing a wax cylinder of cow sounds. You imagine the scene now: plush offices filled with the ticking of metronomes, the soft murmur of cow recordings, and the gentle hum of gaslights. Historians still debate whether this gadget craze reflected genuine sleep science or just a collision between wealth, boredom, and the 19th century obsession with mechanizing human life. Some banks even started issuing catalogs of recommended nap devices for their partners, much like modern corporate wellness programs. A fringe historical footnote: in 1897, a banker in Frankfurt named Otto Weiss developed what might be the first smart nap couch. By the turn of the century, some of these devices faded into obscurity, gathering dust in storage rooms alongside obsolete ticker machines and mechanical adding devices. You settle deeper under your own blanket, thinking about how far people will go to control something as simple and as complicated as rest. As the faint echoes of ticking metronomes and velvet-lined helmets fade from your imagination, you let your breath slow naturally, without any mechanical help at all. Your breathing stays slow, and your mind drifts onward into yet another strange layer of this sleepy banking world: the architectural side of napping. Because when bankers realized they needed better naps, some of them decided gadgets weren't enough. They needed better rooms. And so, in the latter half of the 19th century, banks and private financial clubs started building specialized nap chambers. Not just regular lounges, but spaces engineered for rest, complete with sleep-friendly architecture, carefully chosen materials, and even temperature controls. These weren't afterthoughts, they were status symbols. But letters from the time-mentioned partners emerging from the Plutarch room looking remarkably refreshed. So, you be the judge. One mainstream historical fact: gentlemen's clubs in London, New York, and Paris often featured retiring rooms or rest chambers by the 1880s. Banker's green, that's the specific shade of dark green you still see in old financial institutions and libraries. Historians still debate whether this color was chosen because it's easy on the eyes or because it reminded financiers of money. Either way, nap chambers were often painted in muted greens and deep browns to signal calmness and wealth simultaneously. Bankers believed in rest ergonomics long before that term existed. Gas sconces with frosted glass shades created diffused, indirect light. Some banks experimented with colored glass to tint the room in warm ambers or gentle rose hues, believing this would reduce eye strain and promote deeper relaxation. There's a faint ticking from a clock on the wall, nothing sharp, just the soft, continuous rhythm of passing time, reminding you that the outside world still exists but doesn't need your attention right now. In an era before electric fans, this was a big deal. Clerks sometimes had to adjust the vents before each partner's nap, learning personal preferences. Mr. Harding likes a cool breeze. Mr. Spencer prefers absolute stillness. A partner steps inside, closes the velvet curtain, and loosens his starched collar. He sinks into the chaise, breath slowing, fingers relaxing. Maybe he picks up a cloth sachet filled with dried lavender and places it on his chest, not because it is medically necessary, but because it's part of the routine. Your muscles are soft, your breath steady, and somewhere in the back of your mind, you wonder why modern offices don't do this anymore. Whether that worked or not is still debated, but it certainly looked impressive. Telegrams arrive, stocks rise and fall. But inside, everything is still, the air is cool, the light is soft. And for the next 20 minutes, maybe 30, nothing matters but rest. In London's financial district, some banks installed early versions of climate control, nothing high-tech, just clever architecture. Did better naps lead to better banking, or did they just help the rich get richer? While slightly more refreshed, thick walls, draft-blocking door frames, and steam radiators that could be dialed down to create the perfect cool, but not cold atmosphere for midday sleep. Some offices even used ice blocks wrapped in cloth to chill the air during summer afternoons. No one wants to nap in a sweaty cravat, after all. A valet enters quietly, offering a warm cloth to freshen the face, perhaps a small cup of tea. The banker rises, smooths his waistcoat, and returns to the world of ledgers and loans. Chairs were angled to reduce pressure on the spine. Armrests were padded with horsehair stuffing, which sounds odd today, but was considered premium cushioning in the 1890s. After all, clerks and bookkeepers didn't get access to nap chambers, these were for partners only. But the rooms did exist, and their descriptions appear in private letters, club journals, and even a few surviving architectural blueprints. Some napping couches even had detachable headrests filled with goose down for maximum neck support. Some 19th century nap rooms used layers of cork or felt in the walls to create what was called a dead chamber, where echoes were minimized and outside noise barely penetrated. You can imagine the silence, a rich, padded hush, interrupted only by the occasional creak of a chair or the soft sigh of someone shifting positions. In Paris, a banker named Etienne Lavallee took things even further. His office reportedly featured a private nap atrium, a small indoor courtyard with a glass ceiling, designed to filter sunlight through layers of silk curtains dyed in soothing pastels. Lavallee claimed this made his naps like floating in a summer sky. His colleagues mostly thought he was showing off. The air inside is cool and faintly scented with cedar oil. Heavy velvet curtains cover the windows, muffling the street noise. Gas lights are turned low, casting a gentle amber glow that soothes rather than stimulates. The entrance was disguised as a bookshelf. You'd pull out a leather-bound copy of Plutarch's Lives, and the wall would swing open. Inside, you'd find a room lined with sound-dampening cork, Turkish rugs, and reclining chairs imported from Vienna. These were private spaces where elite members could nap, change clothes, or simply escape from the chaos of daily life. Banks borrowed this idea, but added their own financial flavor. A fringe tidbit: in 1891, the Merchants Bank of New York secretly hired an architect, Samuel Parker Wainwright, to design a nap chamber hidden behind a false wall in their main office. Historians still argue whether this specific room was built for rest or for secret financial meetings. You picture yourself stepping into one of these hidden spaces, leaving behind the clatter of typewriters, the metallic snap of telegraph keys, and the rustle of ledgers. The furniture isn't accidental either. A quirky design trend. Temperature mattered, too. Historians still argue whether these rooms reflected genuine concern for employee well-being or just elite self-indulgence. There's a fringe architectural element that often gets overlooked: soundproofing. Lighting was also meticulously planned. A fringe tidbit? You recline in your imagination now, picturing the layers of fabric, the scent of polished wood, the gentle hush of a soundproofed room. Some banks even included subtle ventilation features. Small vents near the floor allowed fresh air to circulate without creating drafts. Historians still argue whether this level of attention to comfort helped financial decision-making or just created a culture of entitlement. You drift further into this world, thinking about the quiet rituals that must have unfolded in these rooms. Outside the nap room, the city keeps churning. And when the nap is done, a gentle knock at the door. You imagine standing at the threshold of one of these chambers now, not quite ready to leave, but knowing you eventually must. Then again, maybe they do. Maybe it's just called putting your Zoom on mute and closing your eyes for 10 minutes. Either way, you breathe out, letting the imagined silk curtains fall shut in your mind, leaving you wrapped in that quiet, green-tinged calm. Your body settles deeper now, the way it might after sinking into one of those velvet-lined banker's chairs from a century ago. But tonight, you're not finished wandering through this sleepy side of financial history, not yet. Because as napping became an institutional ritual, something else crept in: nap etiquette. That's right, you don't just plop down for a nap whenever you feel like it. Oh no, there's a ritual. You request repose time through the proper channels, usually by sending a handwritten note via clerk. In London, the Bankers Club maintained an official code of restful conduct by 1896. Among its rules, no facial twitching during naps. Were bankers truly relaxing, or were they performing rest as another social skill? You can picture the tension, lying back, eyes closed, but part of your brain worrying about whether you've drooled onto your cravat. Seen as a sign of nervous temperament, no drooling considered uncouth, and no vocal utterances while in semi-slumber. He rehearsed different facial expressions in front of a looking glass to perfect the look of calm financial authority. Was napping truly restorative if you had to choreograph your every move? His diaries from 1898 describe this as his vigilance face. These weren't just ordinary timepieces, they had special dials or discrete chimes to signal the end of a nap. Instead, you used euphemisms: "I shall retire for reflection," or "I will engage in restorative contemplation." There was a certain performative seriousness to it, as if naps were board meetings with your subconscious. One rare model, the Horologium Requis, was sold exclusively in Zurich and featured a mother-of-pearl alarm hand that vibrated softly rather than ringing. Historians still argue whether this was an early forerunner of the vibrating fitness tracker, or just an expensive gimmick. No one knows if it worked, but he did get promoted. Just you, resting. One member, Lord Percival Branscombe, famously broke the last rule by muttering about cheap futures in his sleep, earning him the nickname the Somnolent Shepherd. Bankers sometimes bragged quietly, of course, about how quickly they could fall asleep. Falling asleep fast was seen as a mark of professional control, a sign that you could switch your brain on and off at will. A fringe tidbit? In 1895, a banker named Alfred Pennington supposedly held the informal record at the Union League Club. He could fall asleep in 40 seconds flat, fully dressed, monocle and all. His colleagues called him the human shutter. If approved, you're assigned a time slot in the nap chamber. But either way, it became part of the lore, the pressure to appear calm, composed, and effortlessly productive even in rest. Where silence was golden, drooling was forbidden, and the pursuit of perfect repose was just another part of the financial game. But tonight, you get to let that go. No one's watching. No brass nameplate is hanging outside your door. No clerk is recording your nap time in a ledger. If you're too junior, you might not get one at all. Stretching was allowed, but only subtly, like a cat adjusting its paws, not like a circus contortionist cracking knuckles. Yawning, a dab behind each ear, perhaps a quick comb through the mustache. You didn't want to look to relax. There was an art to appearing just the right amount of refreshed without seeming lazy. Acceptable if done behind a handkerchief. Anything else, undignified, sorry. In the world of 19th century finance, naps weren't just about dozing off. They were about status, manners, and hierarchy. And just like dining protocols or the correct way to button a waistcoat, there were unspoken rules for how, when, and where a banker could properly take a nap. One mainstream historical fact: Victorian and Gilded Age societies were obsessed with etiquette. The ideal banker's nap was said to be precisely 22 minutes. Not too short, that would seem amateurish. Not too long, that would imply weakness. Of course, not everyone stuck to this rule. Some old-school financiers believed in the power hour, while others, influenced by emerging medical studies, swore by micronaps of just 5 minutes. You, reclining there now, can pick whatever works for you. Fortunately, no one's timing you tonight. There were published guides on everything from letter writing to funeral attire. It wasn't just about politeness, it was about reinforcing social order. After all, only the senior partners got nameplates with gold edging. The rest had to settle for plain brass and rest. Well, that had its own pecking order too. So imagine yourself as a junior partner in an 1890s financial firm. A fringe tidbit: some private banks in Boston used tiny brass nameplates outside the nap rooms. When a banker entered for rest, he flipped his nameplate to occupy dat repose. It was considered rude to knock unless it was an emergency. And by emergency, they usually meant a market collapse or perhaps a fire. A minor crisis, not nap-worthy. No shoes on the chaise lounge unless you covered them with a silk footcloth provided by the staff. No loud sighing, no talking, obviously, and definitely no snoring. In fact, some bankers reportedly trained themselves to nap in silence, fearing that noisy rest would be seen as undisciplined. You can imagine the pressure, nap, but don't enjoy it too much. Historians still argue whether these nameplates were a sincere attempt to create respectful boundaries or just another way to flaunt status. Inside the nap rooms, there were rules of behavior too, a quirky tidbit. Historians still debate whether this kind of sleep etiquette made napping more restorative or just more stressful. There were even rules for waking up. A proper gentleman's nap ended with grace and composure. Some banks kept little bottles of cologne or rosewater near the nap chairs so partners could freshen up before returning to the floor, a fringe tidbit. One New York banker, Gerald M. Hutchings, took this so seriously that he actually practiced his post-nap mirror routine in private. Historians still argue whether this kind of nap stagecraft was about health or just about ego. There were also expectations around nap length, a fringe bit of lore. Some partners kept pocket watches specifically calibrated for napping. Etiquette also extended to how you talked about naps. You didn't say, "I'm going to sleep." That sounded lazy. And yes, there were even competitive elements. Historians still argue whether this was genuine skill or just exhaustion disguised as efficiency. You, listening here now, might feel the same pull toward performance in your own life. Your only job is to breathe, relax, and allow your mind to drift through this strange etiquette of old-world naps. So go ahead, roll your shoulders softly, adjust your blanket, and let the rules fade away. In this moment, there's no etiquette. Your breath remains slow, your muscles soft, and you drift even deeper into this peculiar world where finance and sleep collided. By now, you've tiptoed through gadgets, furniture, and etiquette, but there's another layer to this nap economy that bankers of the 19th century took very seriously: diet. Because if you're going to conk out in the middle of the workday, you need to think about what's in your stomach, or at least, that's what they believed. Doctors argued that heavy lunches made afternoon work impossible, while light meals enhanced mental clarity and, of course, nap quality. You might call this proto-biohacking, minus the protein shakes. That's right, bankers didn't just nap. They curated their eating habits to optimize those naps. Popular guides like the Gentleman's Gastronomic Regimen warned of the dangers of rich sauces and red meats before napping. The wallpaper is heavy with flock patterns, the chandelier flickers gently, and you're surrounded by men in waistcoats debating whether boiled chicken leads to deeper sleep than lamb cutlets. One of them is scribbling down results, while another dabs his lips with a napkin and quietly dozes off in his chair. Instead, they recommended poached fish, soft breads, and chamomile tea. The prevailing belief was that you needed at least 47 minutes between eating and napping. Why 47? Historians still debate this exact number, but letters from the time mention it again and again, like some magical digestive benchmark. Some say it comes from Galenic medical traditions. Others think it was just an arbitrary figure that stuck because it sounded precise. Picture that, a Wall Street titan delicately sipping chamomile before nodding off. In New York, some financial clubs offered small doses of bromide salts to help calm bankers' nerves before a nap. Bromides were over-the-counter sedatives in the late 1800s, legal, popular, and, well, pretty dangerous if overused. But in small doses, they were considered perfectly normal, like chewing a mint after lunch. One mainstream historical fact: in the 19th century, medical journals and wellness books were filled with advice about digestive repose. One banker, Cyrus Elbridge of Chicago swore by what he called his nap elixir, which was just warm milk mixed with crushed almonds and a splash of laudanum. Yes, laudanum, the opium tincture. Safe? Absolutely not, but very common at the time. Historians still argue whether this habit contributed to his legendary calm or to his early retirement. Bankers weren't just reading stock reports, they were thumbing through books on restful digestion and nerve-calming meals. Either way, their handwritten notes still survive in a dusty archive in Bath, England, including one cryptic entry that simply reads, "Avoid Stilton." Terrible dreams. In 1893, a group of London financiers started a club called the Somnolent Supper Society. The club's entire purpose was to experiment with different meal combinations to see which produced the best naps afterward. They kept detailed records, yes, actual nap diaries rating each food's impact on postprandial repose. Gooseberry compote. Excellent for drowsiness. Pickled herring. Disaster. A fringe tidbit. Historians still argue whether these gentlemen were genuinely studying nap science or just looking for an excuse to eat and sleep more often. You imagine yourself now, seated at a long oak table in a stuffy Victorian dining room. And it wasn't just about the food itself, it was about timing. Bankers also started dabbling in what we'd now call supplements. A fringe tidbit? You picture Elbridge now, sitting in his mahogany office, swirling his glass of almond-laced laudanum, eyelids fluttering, just moments away from slipping into a dream where interest rates and almond groves merge into one. Not everyone went the chemical route, though. Some bankers turned to yoga-like stretches before eating and napping. In fact, the Harvard Health Manual of 1898 recommended light limb flexion after lunch to aid digestion and prepare the body for rest. This wasn't called yoga. Of course, Victorian gentlemen would have choked on their cravats at the idea. But soft stretches, shoulder rolls, and controlled breathing? But control was the key theme. These men believed that naps weren't just accidental pauses, they were strategic tools. And managing diet was part of that strategy, perfectly acceptable, as long as you did them behind closed doors. One concierge reportedly kept a ledger of each banker's preferred nap meal. Quiet spaces, away from the clatter of the main hall, where partners could eat slowly, with no meetings, no papers, and definitely no discussions of financial crashes. Eating for sleep required silence. You can imagine the scene: a crisp white apron, a silver tray, and someone quietly noting that Monsieur Dupont prefers barley water and white grapes before his noon repose. The gas lights are dimmed. The chair is comfortable. There's no Slack notification pinging in your ear. But either way, the nap economy had fully merged with the lunch economy by the late 1800s. Rest wasn't an accident. Or maybe, if you're brave, a tiny nap souffle. It was a meal, a ritual, and sometimes a science experiment. A quirky side note: some bankers became superstitious about their nap diets. One New York financier insisted on eating exactly 3 Brazil nuts before every nap, claiming it calibrated his humors. Another swore off cabbage forever after dreaming of a bear market, literally a giant bear running through his office. Historians still argue whether these rituals had any real effect, or whether they were just a way to feel in control of bodies that spent too many hours at desks. In Paris, certain private banks went as far as to employ digestive concierges, essentially early-day nutritionists who advised partners on what to eat to maximize energy and minimize grogginess. A fringe detail: there's record of at least one banker in Vienna who took things to absurd lengths. He allegedly paid a chef to create custom nap soufflés, egg dishes designed to lull him into a gentle, dozy haze. The chef eventually wrote a private recipe book called Slumber Gastronomy, though sadly, no copies survive. And it wasn't just what they ate, it was also where. Some banks had private dining rooms specifically for pre-nap meals. You let yourself imagine this calm now. A plate of soft white rolls, a little poached cod, maybe a glass of lemon balm tea, and nothing, absolutely nothing on your calendar for the next hour but digestion and drowsiness. Historians still argue whether all this effort actually made these bankers more successful, or whether they were just inventing elaborate excuses to rest in style. So tonight, as you settle deeper into your pillow, your stomach soft and still, you might wonder, what would your nap meal be? 3 Brazil nuts? Chamomile? Either way, you're free to close your eyes now, knowing that somewhere in the past, a room full of bankers was doing exactly the same thing between bites, between trades, between dreams. Your body stays heavy, nestled deeper now, as if you've joined the ranks of those long-gone bankers reclining in their velvet chairs, silk slippers barely brushing the carpet. But there's another twist to this peculiar story. Naps didn't just happen in the office or the club, they began to spill into the social world of finance. Taking naps together, sometimes literally in the same room, became a subtle form of business bonding. This wasn't just about rest anymore. It was about trust, hierarchy, and shared vulnerability. By the late 19th century, naps became part of financial networking culture. Yes, you heard that right. They were places where the real deals happened, quiet backroom agreements, mergers planned over cigars, and informal handshakes that changed entire industries. And naps, well, they became part of that soft power ecosystem. Some required slippers and dressing gowns provided by the club's staff. Others demanded complete silence, enforced by a steward who would gently remove anyone who muttered about cotton bonds or rail shares in his sleep. Did bankers really rest, or did they lie there with one eye half open, monitoring who snored, who sighed, and who seemed restless before a big merger? One mainstream historical fact: in Victorian and Gilded Age society, private gentlemen's clubs weren't just for drinking brandy and swapping gossip. This meant closing deals while half reclined on couches, in near silence, sometimes with lavender sachets pressed to their temples. Rather than finalizing deals over brandy, some financiers insisted on lying down for half an hour first, each wondering whether to merge their companies, while somewhere in the back of their minds, half dreams of gold reserves and ticker tape swirled through the ether. One banker from Philadelphia insisted that no deal was binding unless both parties had slept on it, literally slept on it, in adjacent chairs, sometimes still in their spats. He called it resting toward consensus. Others think it was just a new way to jockey for social position. Who can appear the most unbothered? Who has the calmest nap face, or who wakes up with the steadiest hand? The theory was simple: napping cleared the mind of emotional clutter, allowing for cooler heads and sharper decisions. In a world obsessed with power and profit, these men shared their most vulnerable state, their sleep. No harp music needed tonight, just the rhythm of your breath, the softness of your pillow, and the strange knowledge that, once upon a time, entire fortunes were shaped by men dozing side by side. No speeches, no hard stares across the negotiation table. Gentle snores, soft robes, and whispered agreements forged not in battle, but in sleep. Just breathing, soft snores, maybe the occasional dream about tariffs or tulip bulbs. Some letters from J.P. Morgan's circle reference this directly, phrases like, "Let us revisit the matter after we rest our thoughts." It wasn't laziness. It was strategy. Historians still argue whether this relaxed approach actually led to better decisions or just fewer arguments. No matter how wealthy or powerful, each man had to surrender just for a moment to the pull of sleep. Eyes closed, guard lowered, mind drifting somewhere between spreadsheets and subconscious. The idea was to create a dreamlike atmosphere that soothed both body and mind. One banker, known only as WHB in surviving journals, described this as negotiating through lullaby. It's the great equalizer. You, reclining there now, know the feeling. Everyone does. Losing your blanket was considered a minor scandal, like forgetting your top hat at the opera. The story goes that both men dreamed of the same train at the same time, woke up, shook hands, and called the lawyers. Is it true? Historians still debate it, but the image lingers: two men dreaming of steam engines and waking to financial empires. There's even a surviving ledger listing fines for blanket misplacement to shillings for pence. The Union Club of New York, founded in 1836, had what they called the slumber parlors. These weren't just nap rooms, they were carefully curated spaces where senior financiers could lie down in proximity to one another, allowing a strange mix of competition and camaraderie. In Paris, certain financiers arranged quiet hour conferences, meetings where no one was allowed to speak for the first 45 minutes because everyone was expected to doze lightly before getting down to business. One banker from Credit Lyonnais described it in a letter as negotiation by way of tranquility. If you shared a nap space with a rival banker and still trusted him not to steal your pocket watch while you dozed, well, that was a kind of bond, a fringe tidbit. Historians still argue whether this sort of shared napping actually increased trust between business partners, or whether it was just another performance, a chance to show off how at ease you were in your own skin and velvet slippers. Imagine it now. You enter a room with 6 polished chaise lounges, each one angled just slightly toward the crackling fireplace. The gas lights are dimmed to amber. You recognize the other bankers, some friends, some frenemies. You all settle in, adjust your waistcoats, close your eyes, and drift into a collective midday dream state. It's like a board meeting, but horizontal. Of course, there were rules. Each club had its own nap protocols. A quirky tidbit: at the Reform Club in London, members were issued personal nap blankets embroidered with their initials. Historians still debate whether these shared napping practices were a form of genuine relaxation or just another layer of social chess. These nap gatherings weren't always spontaneous, either. Some were planned, even strategic. A fringe detail: in Vienna's coffeehouse culture, there were financial circles that practiced what they called Stillgeschäft, literally, quiet business. In America, the practice evolved into something called the after-lunch agreement. You can imagine the scene: to titans of finance reclining in a quiet office, sweet eyes closed, a fringe tidbit. There's something oddly intimate about this, isn't there? Historians still argue whether this practice softened business culture or simply masked ruthlessness beneath a velvet quilt. Some suggest it made financiers more collaborative. And yet, there's something universally human about the whole thing. In some cases, nap deals became legendary. There's a story, half true, half myth, about two railway magnates who supposedly agreed on a merger during a shared nap in 1897. A fringe note: some nap rooms featured soft harp music played live by club-employed musicians. You might smile at that now, wrapped in your own quiet cocoon. So let that image float in your mind a bit longer. A room of velvet chairs, half dreams of markets and mergers. Your body stays quiet, heavier now, as you float deeper into this financial dreamscape where sleep was strategy and repose was reputation. But even in this world of velvet robes and harp-accompanied naps, there were moments when things went sideways, because wherever humans gather, even for sleep, someone's bound to get competitive. Who could nap the longest? Who had the most luxurious rest space? Who woke up looking the most refreshed, as if emerging from a Greek myth rather than a chaise lounge? Not a carriage, a literal human coach who advised him on optimal napping posture, breathing rhythms, and thought preparation before dozing. The man was paid handsomely to whisper calming affirmations as Josiah drifted off. His contract reportedly included a clause about maintaining utmost discretion regarding clients' slumber habits. One particularly zealous vice president even tracked his pulse rate before and after naps, claiming it proved the efficiency of his repose. The winner wasn't the person who slept the longest, but the one who achieved the most efficient nap, usually gauged by waking up exactly on time, without assistance. No alarm clocks allowed, just pure internal clock mastery. By the late 19th century, the nap culture of bankers wasn't just about relaxation anymore. It became a subtle game of social one-upmanship. One mainstream historical fact: during the Gilded Age, conspicuous consumption wasn't limited to diamonds and yachts. Letters from the period describe men lying awake in their lounges, terrified they wouldn't fall asleep fast enough or deeply enough to maintain their social standing. There's mention of a group in Chicago's Board of Trade that tried synchronized napping, everyone lying down at precisely the same time to level the playing field. The theory was that no one would gain a secret advantage from a longer rest. Some bankers commissioned artists to paint or sketch them asleep, perfectly posed, of course, with just the right angle of jawline and waistcoat. These repose portraits became status items, hung in private studies alongside oil paintings of yachts and racehorses. One Parisian banker reportedly had a marble bust made of himself mid-nap, lips slightly parted, an eternal tribute to his love of rest. Did it work? You wonder what modern HR departments would think if you requested a similar portrait for your Zoom profile. Not because they were lazy, but because, in that strange chapter of history, sleep was status. Nap time wasn't downtime, it was prime time. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine egalitarian experiment or just an excuse to take extended lunch breaks en masse. There's no prize for it tonight, no silver pocket watch, no marble bust. Just the simple satisfaction of being still, knowing that even the titans of capitalism once competed to close their eyes first. But remnants of this nap culture lingered into the early 20th century, slowly fading as financial centers grew noisier, busier, and more mechanized. Some families of bankers even wrote nap habits into their wills. One wealthy financier in Philadelphia bequeathed his custom chaise lounge to his eldest son. along with the stipulation that it only be used for postprandial contemplative rest between the hours of 1 and 2 p.m. Nothing like passing down financial assets and sleep routines. One particularly stressed financier from Baltimore reportedly consulted a hypnotist, hoping to shorten his onset latency, which is a fancy way of saying he wanted to fall asleep faster than his rivals. But records from Club Minutes show that people took them very seriously indeed. You know the type. "Oh, I only need 4 hours a night." One London financier recorded over 300 dreams involving gold coins raining from the sky. Another noted repeated visions of counting house ledgers gently closing themselves. Phones rang constantly. The idea of slipping away for a velvet-draped nap became old-fashioned, almost quaint. Productivity replaced repose as the ultimate flex. But for a brief window in history, men in silk vests competed not over who stayed up the latest, but over who could sleep best, longest, and most luxuriously. Historians still argue whether these journals were genuine attempts at self-analysis or just another status symbol to show off how in tune someone was with his subconscious financial genius. Or the reverse: "I prioritize my 8 hours. Thank you very much." Back then, it was no different except the competition was happening horizontally, in smoking rooms and bank offices. One man was expelled from a London club for secretly setting a pocket watch alarm to win the contest's scandalous behavior in the world of dignified repose. Bankers flaunted their status with custom-tailored suits, bespoke canes, and yes, personalized nap gear. Silk eye masks, monogrammed blankets, imported goose-down pillows. You will awaken refreshed, and your bonds will mature at precisely the right time. Maybe you chuckle softly in the dark. Maybe you secretly wish someone would whisper that to you right now. Some say it was the forerunner of today's corporate wellness consultants. Others suggest it was just a rich man's hobby that never caught on beyond a few East Coast elites. Some even traveled with portable napping kits, just in case the urge for a midday snooze struck while visiting a competitor's office. A fringe tidbit: there's record of one Boston financier, Josiah Throckmorton III, who commissioned a sleep coach in 1889. Historians still argue whether this trend of napping coaches was isolated eccentricity or part of a wider, undocumented luxury service economy for the ultra-wealthy. You picture it now: Josiah, eyes half closed, being softly told, "You are a sturdy oak in the forest of finance." This competitive napping led to some truly bizarre scenarios. At one bank in New York, partners reportedly kept nap logs, comparing daily rest times like athletes comparing sprint speeds. A quirky detail: nap duration contests became a thing at some gentlemen's clubs, complete with engraved silver pocket watches as prizes. Historians still debate whether these competitions were serious or just another layer of upper-class performance art. This all sounds absurd, but there's something familiar about it, isn't there? Even today, we humble brag about sleep, a fringe tidbit. Some bankers kept dream journals, claiming that productive dreams were a sign of superior rest. And of course, with competition comes anxiety. Some bankers developed what was referred to at the time as repose panic, a kind of performance anxiety about napping. A fringe detail: the competitiveness even seeped into nap aesthetics. Imagine that for a second: a cold stone sculpture of someone softly snoozing, proudly displayed for guests, a fringe tidbit. Historians still debate whether these traditions had lasting cultural impact or fizzled out with the changing tides of industry. By the 1920s, ticker tape machines clattered through lunch hours. And tonight, as you lie there still, you can smile at the idea that rest itself was once a financial weapon, wielded with as much calculation as any ledger entry. So go ahead, stretch a little deeper into your own repose. Your breath softens as you sink further into this historical haze, where competition for the perfect nap wasn't the only strange twist in 19th century banker culture. Eventually, the obsession with elite rest spaces reached an inevitable next phase: the rise of customized nap technology. It sparked a boom in personal comfort gadgets, from vibrating chairs to automatic foot warmers. By the 1880s, manufacturers were marketing gentlemen's repose devices directly to bankers and stockbrokers. But one thing's certain: the late 19th century market for sleep tech was booming long before the era of wearable sleep trackers and smart mattresses. Reclining chairs with adjustable tilt mechanisms, mechanical noise-canceling panels, even portable air purify fans, all aimed at maximizing nap quality. That's right, you've made it to the era of bespoke sleep devices, all designed to give wealthy financiers the absolute edge in relaxation. He called it the goose warmer, after an old folk remedy, and claimed it helped him drift off faster after heavy lunches. After all, if your rival had a basic velvet chair and you had a hydraulically reclining chaise with heated wrist supports, who looked more prepared for a quality nap? The Rothschild family, for example, reportedly installed a rest chamber in their Paris office in the 1890s, complete with custom sound dampening panels made from layered cork, wool, and horsehair. At a preset time, the ribbon would tug the napper's wrist ever so slightly enough to rouse them, without the shock of an alarm. One banker described it as being summoned from sleep by an invisible butler. No clocks were allowed to tick audibly. Footsteps were muffled by triple-padded carpets. Phrases like "your investments are secure" and "trust in compound interest" would murmur softly from behind a silk screen. The idea was to reinforce confidence during slumber. Whether it worked is anyone's guess. Historians still debate whether this was early self-hypnosis or just pure financial superstition. The air was perfumed with bergamot and cedar, not for pleasure, but because someone believed those scents balanced the humors. Letters from the era include snarky comments like, "If only they spent half as much time managing accounts as they do adjusting nap cushions." A brochure from 1897 advertised the Executive Repose System, a modular suite of nap furniture including a reclining chair, a scent diffuser cabinet, and a brass-tuned sound machine that played recorded ocean waves via wax cylinder. We still chase sleep solutions today, don't we? Smart pillows, sleep apps, weighted blankets. The quest for perfect rest never really went away, it just swapped velvet slippers for Wi-Fi-enabled headbands. Yes, an actual pre-electric white noise machine, operated with hand cranks. Soft mechanical murmurs promising you fiscal security as you drift further into slumber. No meetings, no emails, no alarms, just engineered peace, vintage style. There were even political cartoons, drawings of bankers hooked up to elaborate sleep contraptions while the economy teetered in the background. They didn't just nap, they optimized napping until it became an art form, complete with gadgets for the gadgets, and probably a ledger to keep track of it all. Some of these wax cylinders still exist in museum archives. After all, by 1900, the stock market was moving faster, telegraph lines buzzed constantly. Time was money, and elaborate napping rituals no longer fit the tempo of modern finance. Scholars who've outplayed them back report hearing looped seaside sounds, interrupted occasionally by what might be the voice of the recording technician clearing his throat. Imagine trying to nap through that. The optics mattered. The club steward assigned to maintain it had to heat the stones in a coal oven every morning. Some contemporary critics called it slumber vanity, the idea that men who could afford the best naps must surely make the best trades. Others pointed out that, regardless of sleep gadgets, markets still crashed when speculation went too far. Lavender mist didn't stop the panic of 1893. The Berlin-based company Schlummerwerk AG offered a contraption called the Nap Harmonizer, a combination of weighted blanket, neck support sling, and an adjustable brass metronome that ticked at a relaxation-optimized rhythm. Some bankers swore by it. Your chair adjusts silently beneath you thanks to a discreet foot lever, and a small copper fan on the windowsill circulates lavender-scented air. These folding panels were set around nap chairs to block out visual distractions and, presumably, nosy colleagues. Some screens were even painted with calming images, seascapes, pastoral fields, or classical ruins designed to lull the mind into a meditative state. The world outside? Stock prices, commodity shipments, labor strikes. But in here, it's just you, your breath, and the slow descent into half-sleep. Others described it as a ticking grandfather clock strapped to your chest. One New York firm marketed the Somnavest, a quilted garment with weighted pouches on the shoulders to encourage restful posture. Another, the Banker's Breath Guide, was essentially a leather tube you'd breathe through while lying down, supposedly training you to inhale and exhale at the exact pace recommended by late Victorian sleep doctors. One mainstream historical fact: the Industrial Revolution brought more than just steam engines and telegraphs. A quirky detail? Historians still argue whether these devices actually improved sleep or just capitalized on the anxieties of tired men with too much money. Imagine yourself now reclining in a plush, mahogany-paneled nap suite, the faint ticking of a nap harmonizer nearby. Some of these devices were downright bizarre. A fringe tidbit? There's record of a banker in Philadelphia who commissioned a custom chaise lounge with built-in warm stones under the calf area. Historians still debate whether this explosion of sleep tech reflected genuine concern for health or was simply a way to make rest another avenue for conspicuous consumption, and it wasn't just chairs. Entire rooms were remodeled to optimize the nap experience, a quirky detail. Some rest chambers had mechanical wake-up systems involving gentle pulleys and silk ribbons. Historians still argue whether these sensory enhancements led to better financial decisions or just inflated egos. Yet the arms race for better nap tech continued. In London, a company called Repose & Co. sold padded privacy screens marketed as Dream Shields, a fringe tidbit. One particularly eccentric banker in Liverpool commissioned a napaphone, a device that whispered gentle affirmations at intervals. Of course, not everyone embraced these gadgets. Some financiers mocked the trend, calling it a sleep arms race, but for a time, sleep tech remained serious business, a quirky detail. Historians still argue whether these devices were the peak of financial leisure or the beginning of a decline into overcomplication. And yet, here you are over a century later listening to the echoes of that strange moment in history when bankers turned rest into a competitive sport, a social performance, and finally, a technological obsession. Maybe you feel a little amused by it, or maybe, lying there now, you can relate. So let your mind wander there for a moment. Imagine yourself in a darkened chamber, silk ribbons tied gently to your wrist. Your eyelids are heavy now, as if lined with velvet themselves, but the story glides onward. Because after decades of bespoke sleep gadgets, plush napping suites, and synchronized banker snoozes, the inevitable happened: the backlash. Speed and availability became the new markers of success. Suddenly, a banker napping at his desk wasn't seen as wise. The chaise lounges were wheeled out, replaced by rows of desks with early typewriters. Lavender diffusers gave way to carbon paper and ink ribbons. The age of financial repose was giving way to the age of relentless productivity. And balanced, he was seen as absent a liability in a world that never stopped moving. The pendulum swung back. The early 20th century brought a shift in attitude not just about finance, but about sleep itself. For a while, there was tension, a cultural tug-of-war between tradition and the new tempo of modern finance. Part of this was to promote collaboration, but part of it, frankly, was surveillance. You couldn't secretly nap in a room where everyone could see you from every angle. The velvet curtain napping alcove. Gone. The Dream Shields, packed away or sold at auction. Some older bankers clung to their rest rituals, insisting that short naps improved judgment. But younger partners were eager to prove their stamina. No naps, no rest, just the constant clatter of ticker tape machines. Think about it. Corporate nap pods in tech offices, mindfulness breaks during workdays, apps that track your recovery scores. The banker naps of the 19th century don't seem so ridiculous now, do they? Not because you need to corner the gold market or launch a railway IPO tomorrow, but because you, too, are navigating a world where sleep is both sacred and strategic. Some scholars believe people were still secretly napping, just in new ways. It's not so different from the metronome-ticking nap harmonizer or the lavender-scented rest chambers of old. We've just rebranded it, given it sleeker packaging. Not because of a $5,000 nap chair or a custom marble bust of yourself mid-slumber, but because you allowed yourself this quiet moment, this absurd but gentle history lesson, woven into rest. But the impulse is the same: to control rest, to optimize it, to make it a part of success rather than an escape from it. It's okay if you're still awake, that happens sometimes, but your body knows what to do next. Maybe you'll carry one of those pictures into your dreams, or maybe they'll fade away like soft clouds the moment you fall asleep. The kind you don't have to optimize or document or turn into a status symbol. Quiet, steady, safe, either way, you're right where you need to be. Breathe out, let yourself drift, unhurried, into the gentle rhythm of sleep. There's no test to pass here, no efficiency score to meet. You've already done enough for today. Micronaps in bathroom stalls, dozing behind stacks of paperwork. One banker in Chicago reportedly perfected the art of the ledger lean, propping his elbows just so on an open book to look like he was reading, while actually fast asleep. One New York banker reportedly hired a secretary, not just for dictation, but specifically to poke him if he nodded off during meetings. Just this stillness, just the quiet hum of the room you're in. The Gentleman's Club contests for the most efficient nap. Just the hush of night, the softness of fabric against skin, and the steady rhythm of your own pulse. These were real things, quirks of human behavior wrapped around the simple need to close one's eyes and drift. No grand moment where someone rang a bell and declared, "From this day forward, there shall be no more chaise lounges in the boardroom." But by the time the Great Depression hit in 1929, the culture of restless status had quietly vanished. The nap monitor was an actual role for a brief period. Think of it as early 20th century sleep shaming, right there in the office. During the crash, some of those marble sleep busts, the sculptures of napping financiers, were smashed or hidden away. It wasn't a good look anymore to celebrate luxury sleep when the economy was in ruins. In fact, many of the sleep gadgets and journals from that era were simply discarded. Historians still debate how much of this history was lost on purpose, quietly swept aside in favor of a narrative about hard work and vigilance. There are letters from the 1930s describing estate sales where you could buy a gentleman's repose unit for pennies on the dollar. Luxury chaise lounges that once symbolized power, now gathering dust in someone's attic. One mainstream historical fact: by the 1910s, global finance was accelerating. Telegraph wires hummed with transatlantic stock updates. International banking networks grew more complex. In London's financial district, there was even a brief, strange fad called wakeful sitting, where bankers would sit in rigid chairs after lunch with eyes open but minds resting. No dozing allowed, just blank staring. It was supposed to replicate the benefits of napping without the social cost of closing one's eyes. Did it work? Historians still debate whether this was a legitimate meditation technique or just an awkward compromise that made everyone feel weird. A quirky detail: some of the same banks that once built elaborate nap chambers now repurpose them into telegraph rooms and instant memo centers. Historians still argue whether this change was driven more by technology or by cultural shifts. After World War I, some say the trauma of the war created a new ethic of vigilance. Others believe it was simply the rise of capitalism's next gear, hustle culture 1.0. Either way, rest became suspicious. Some of the very financiers who once bragged about their perfect naps now felt pressured to stay visibly awake. A fringe tidbit: the backlash against naps didn't happen overnight, of course. One mainstream fact: by the 1920s, financial offices began implementing open layouts, rows of desks in shared spaces with no privacy screens. A quirky footnote to this: some of those old nap chairs ended up in private homes, where they became relics of a more indulgent time. Historians still argue whether the anti-nap movement in finance was really about efficiency or just about optics. The death of the financial nap came with no official announcement, a fringe tidbit. And yet, here we are in the 21st century, tiptoeing back toward rest culture. You've probably seen the modern equivalents: ergonomic chairs, white noise machines, sleep trackers. So as you lie there now, fully still, eyes closed or half-lidded, you might feel a kind of kinship with those 19th century financiers. And maybe, just maybe, you'll wake tomorrow feeling like you've had the finest kind of repose. Remember the soft murmur of the napaphone, the silk ribbons tied to the wrist? So tonight, as your breath slows and your body settles, let the competition go. There's no stock ticker in your dreams. No ledger needs balancing right now. Because in the end, whether you're a 19th century banker or just someone lying quietly in bed right now, the goal is the same: rest well, breathe easy, and let the world spin on without you for a little while. Now there's nothing left to chase: not the perfect nap desk, not the lavender-scented rest chamber, not even the soft tug of a silk ribbon around your wrist. Your breath has slowed naturally, almost without you noticing. Maybe your shoulders have softened. Maybe your jaw has unclenched just a little bit. Let your mind drift over the images you've gathered tonight. Velvet-lined chairs, ticking metronomes, financiers gently dozing beneath horsehair soundproofing. There's no competition in this moment. No silver pocket watch to win. No ledger to balance. Just rest-real, simple, human rest. The night air wraps around you now like one of those old bankers' monogram blankets. So breathe in. You've made it to the end of the story. There's nothing else you need to do. The lights are low, the world is quiet, and you can let go now.